In 1943, a dead man saved thousands of lives. He never fired a single shot. He never trained as a soldier. He never saw a battlefield. He never even wore a uniform, at least not while he was alive. In fact, before any of this happened, he was nobody. A homeless man, an alcoholic, someone the world had already forgotten, dying alone on the streets of London. And yet, this forgotten man became one of the most important soldiers of World War II. The Nazis trusted him completely. They moved armies because of him. They changed their entire defense strategy because of what he told them. He didn't say a single word because he was dead. Welcome to the world of military deception, where the greatest weapon isn't a gun, it isn't a bomb, and it isn't an army. It's a perfectly constructed lie. Throughout history, the difference between victory and defeat has often come down to something you might not expect. Not the size of your army, not the power of your weapons, not even the courage of your soldiers. The greatest commanders in history, from ancient China to the beaches of Normandy, understood one truth that most people never learn. The battlefield is won in the mind before it is ever won on the ground. Today we are looking at 4 real operations. 4 moments where a small group of people used nothing but creativity, deception, and extraordinary nerve, and changed the course of history. These are not legends, these are not myths. Every single one of these stories is documented, classified, and in some cases, kept secret for decades. Let's get into it.
It's 1943. The Allied forces have just driven the Nazis out of North Africa. But now comes the hard part, invading Europe itself. The obvious target was Sicily, the large island sitting at the southern tip of Italy. From Sicily, the Allies could push straight up into the heart of Europe. Every general knew it, every strategist knew it, and most importantly, Hitler knew it too. So here was the problem. If the Germans knew exactly where you were going to land, they would be waiting for you. Thousands of soldiers, dug in, fortified, ready. The casualties would be catastrophic. British intelligence needed a miracle. What they came up with was something far stranger. They needed to make Hitler believe the invasion was coming somewhere else entirely. Specifically, Greece and Sardinia. But you can't just tell the enemy something and expect them to believe it. You need proof. You need evidence. You need documents. And that's when someone in MI5 had one of the most bizarre ideas in the history of warfare. What if those documents were carried by a dead man? MI5 found the body of Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh drifter, a nobody, a man who had died alone in London after accidentally consuming rat poison. They gave him a completely new identity. He became Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, a confident, capable officer with a life, a story, and secrets to keep. They dressed him in a perfectly tailored officer's uniform. They filled his pockets with personal details, love letters from a fictional fiancée named Pam, a receipt from a London tailor, a ticket stub, even an unpaid bill for his dress shirt. And then came the critical piece. They attached a leather briefcase to his wrist, chained to his body. Inside that briefcase were top-secret letters between senior Allied commanders, clearly outlining invasion plans for Greece and Sardinia. On April 30th, 1943, a British submarine silently surfaced off the southern coast of Spain, a neutral country known to share intelligence with Nazi Germany. The body of Major William Martin was quietly released into the water and left to drift ashore. Spanish authorities recovered the body within hours, and exactly as planned, the documents made their way directly to German intelligence. Hitler read them. Hitler believed them. He immediately reinforced Greece. He moved panzer tank divisions away from Sicily. He left the real target dangerously exposed. On July 9, 1943, 160,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Sicily. The Germans were in the wrong place. The resistance was far lighter than anyone had dared to hope. Operation Mincemeat had worked. A dead homeless man from Wales had helped change the course of World War II. Now imagine you are a German commander in the summer of 1944. You're positioned in occupied France, and your job is to monitor enemy movements. You have reconnaissance aircraft, you have radio interceptors, you have a network of observers on the ground, and one morning, you get a report that stops you cold. An entire American armored division has appeared overnight in the French countryside. Tanks, half-tracks, artillery units, supply trucks, thousands of soldiers moving through the fields. You can see them from the air. You can hear them on the radio. Your ground observers confirm the position. You report it up the chain of command. Reinforcements are redirected. Defense lines are redrawn. There is just one problem. None of it is real. Meet the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known by the name that wasn't declassified until 1996, the Ghost Army. One of the strangest, most creative, and most effective military units in the entire history of the United States Army. Here is what made them different. When the Army needed soldiers for this unit, they didn't go to the infantry. They didn't go to the artillery corps. They went to art schools. They went to design studios. They went to theater companies and radio stations. The Ghost Army was built from artists, painters, set designers, sound engineers, actors, men who spent their careers creating illusions, and were now being asked to do it on a scale that could get people killed if they got it wrong. They had 4 weapons, and none of them fired a single bullet. The first weapon was inflation, giant rubber tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces, inflatable decoys that could be set up by a small team in a matter of hours. From the air, from a distance, they were completely convincing. An entire armored division could appear overnight and vanish just as fast. The second weapon was sound. They had half-track vehicles fitted with enormous speakers, powerful enough to project the sounds of tank engines, marching troops, and military construction across 15 miles of open countryside. In the dark, with the right wind, an invisible army sounded absolutely real. The third weapon was radio deception. Ghost Army operators had studied the personal styles of real unit radio operators, their rhythms, their habits, their shortcuts. They could impersonate an entire division's communications so convincingly that German intelligence analysts never suspected a thing. The fourth weapon was theater. Soldiers dressed as high-ranking officers would drive into nearby towns, eat at local restaurants, and loudly discuss upcoming operations, knowing full well that the information would spread. And it always did. Over the course of the war, the Ghost Army executed more than 20 deception operations across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Historians believe they may have saved tens of thousands of American lives. And when it was all over, they went home, back to their studios, back to their canvases, back to being artists, the most creative soldiers who ever served. You already know the story of the Trojan horse. The Greeks built a giant wooden horse, hid their best soldiers inside, and left it outside the gates of Troy as a gift. The Trojans brought it inside. That night, the soldiers climbed out, opened the gates, and Troy fell. It is one of the oldest and most famous acts of military deception in human history. And in 1944, the Allied forces pulled off something on an almost incomprehensible scale that worked on exactly the same principle. It was called Operation Fortitude, and it was built around one simple, devastating idea: make the Germans look in the wrong direction. Here is what the Allies knew going into 1944. They needed to invade France. They needed to cross the English Channel, and they needed to land somewhere along the northern French coastline. The target they had chosen was Normandy. But Normandy could only work if the Germans didn't know it was coming. Because if Hitler concentrated his full defensive force on the Normandy beaches, the casualties would be beyond anything the Allies could survive. So they built a lie, and they built it to be believed. First, they constructed an entirely fictional army. They called it the 1st United States Army Group, and they placed it in southeast England, directly across the channel from Pas-de-Calais, a stretch of French coastline that was the most obvious and logical invasion point. This fictional army had everything a real army would have. Fake military camps were constructed across the English countryside, large enough to be clearly visible from German reconnaissance aircraft flying overhead. Fake fuel storage depots, fake landing craft moored in the rivers and harbors, fake supply lines. All of it designed to be seen, photographed, and reported back to Berlin. Second, they filled the airwaves with radio traffic. An entirely fictional army needs an entirely fictional radio network. Ghost operators transmitted thousands of fake messages, unit movements, supply requests, operational orders, building the picture of a massive force preparing to strike at Pas-de-Calais.
Third, and this was perhaps the most brilliant element, they put General George Patton in command of this fictional army. Patton was the one American general that the German High Command genuinely feared above all others. If Patton was leading an army, the Germans were going to take it very seriously, and they did. And fourth, every single German spy operating inside Britain had already been caught and turned by MI5. Every agent Berlin thought was feeding them real intelligence was actually under British control, carefully delivering exactly the information the Allies wanted Germany to believe. On June 6, 1944, the real invasion struck Normandy. 156,000 troops crossed the Channel in a single day. But the genius of Operation Fortitude did not end there. Even after the landings began, German High Command held back their Panzer Reserve divisions for weeks. They were convinced that Normandy was a feint, that the real invasion, Patton's invasion, was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. The Allies had their foothold, and the road to Berlin had begun. Everything we have talked about so far, the dead man in the ocean, the rubber tanks in the French fields, the fictional army waiting at the wrong coastline, all of it traces back to one source, one man, one book. Written over 2,500 years ago. His name was Sun Tzu, and he understood something about warfare that most commanders throughout history never fully grasped. War is not won by the side with the most soldiers. War is not won by the side with the most powerful weapons. War is won by the side that controls what the enemy believes. Sun Tzu was a Chinese military general, strategist, and philosopher who lived during the spring and autumn period of ancient China, roughly 500 years before the birth of Christ. He wrote a short book of 13 chapters. That book was called The Art of War, and it is still required reading at military academies from West Point to Sandhurst to Beijing today. But Sun Tzu did not just write about deception, he demonstrated it in one of the most cold-blooded displays of authority ever recorded in military history. The King of Wu wanted proof that Sun Tzu's methods worked before trusting him with an army, so he gave him a test. He placed 180 of his palace concubines, the women of his royal household, in front of Sun Tzu and told him to turn them into soldiers. Sun Tzu accepted. He divided the women into 2 companies, appointed the king's 2 favorite concubines as company commanders, and began explaining the drill commands clearly and carefully. The women laughed. They did not take it seriously. They talked among themselves, ignored the commands, and treated the entire exercise as entertainment. Sun Tzu explained the commands a second time, with patience and precision. The women laughed again. Sun Tzu then said something that no one in that courtyard expected. He said, "When instructions are clear and commands are not followed, the fault lies with the commanders." He ordered the 2 lead concubines, the king's personal favorites, to be executed immediately in front of the entire group. The king protested. Sun Tzu refused to stop. The executions were carried out. The room went absolutely silent. Sun Tzu gave the commands a third time. This time, every single woman performed the drill in perfect silence and perfect order. Not one mistake. Not one hesitation. His point was proven. Discipline is not requested, it is established. And it is established through absolute consistency between words and action. But it is the philosophy behind the demonstration that echoes through every operation in this video. Sun Tzu wrote, "All warfare is based on deception. When capable, appear incapable. When active, appear inactive. When near, make the enemy believe you are far. When far, make them believe you are near." Operation Mincemeat, the Ghost Army, Operation Fortitude, each one a perfect execution of principles written 500 years before the Roman Empire existed. The weapons change, the uniforms change, the maps change, but the oldest truth in the history of warfare never does. So, what does all of this tell us? A homeless man who died alone on a London street became one of the most important soldiers of World War II. A group of painters and actors built a fake army that saved tens of thousands of lives. An entire fictional general commanding a fictional force held back Hitler's best tank divisions at the most critical moment in the history of the Western Front. And a Chinese philosopher who lived before the Roman Empire ever existed wrote the blueprint for all of it. In 13 short chapters that the world's greatest military minds are still reading today. None of these men won their battles with superior numbers. None of them won with superior firepower. They won because they understood something that is easy to say and incredibly difficult to actually do. They controlled what the enemy believed, and the enemy fought the war they were given, not the war that was real. That is the deepest lesson of military history. The most dangerous opponent you will ever face is not the one standing in front of you. It is the one who has already decided what you are going to do before you have even moved. Sun Tzu understood this in 500 BC. British intelligence understood this in 1943. A group of artists in American military uniforms understood this in 1944. And now, so do you. Military history is full of moments like these. Moments where one idea, one decision, one perfectly placed lie changed everything, and we have only just begun to scratch the surface. If you want to go deeper, if you want more stories of the battles that were won before a single shot was fired, subscribe, because next time we are going even further. Leave a comment below. Which of these 4 operations surprised you the most? I want to know. I will see you in the next one.